Yes, ma'am. Take a deep breath, long, hard, steady blow. A little bit harder for me, a little bit harder. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay. You're a Bradley student?
I graduate in 4 weeks.
You're a .264, okay? All right. Okay, go ahead and turn around for me and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for DUI. Okay? Okay.
You're doing great.
All right. Come right over here. Let me sit back in my car.
Do you remember Posh Mama, the woman who is always here on TikTok talking about her teeth and remedies for problems in your life? Well, she killed someone. This is a true story. So Posh Mama was a TikToker who was always talking about oil pulling and teeth health and all this stuff. And for a while, she was actually giving advice to millions of people. I remember seeing her videos pop up on my For You page. But at one point, a bunch of different doctors and people who had some sort of knowledge in the field came on TikTok and started exposing her for basically being a fraud and giving bad advice to people. And then people started digging into her past and found out that only a few years ago, she had murdered her boyfriend with a car in Pennsylvania. So her real name is Esther Brubaker, and this is a kind of disturbing tale. So this is Esther's boyfriend who she killed. His name is Jeremy Anderson, and he actually went viral a few years ago for being in a video where he was claiming he was being brutalized by the police. But in 2013, when Esther and Jeremy were driving home in the same car, they began to argue about something, and Esther got really worked up. When they reached the couple's home, Jeremy hopped out of the car, and Esther floored it and ran Jeremy over, killing him. So Esther fled the scene, and she was eventually arrested by cops. She was with an ex-boyfriend of hers drinking at a bar. When she was arrested, she was hammered, drunk, and obviously it was time for her to face the consequences of what she had just done. So she ended up serving a few years in prison, but then she was released, and that's when Esther started her TikTok account, Posh Mama. Now, Esther actually bullied family members of Jeremy's when they started speaking out against her and trying to remind people that she had murdered somebody in her past and that they probably shouldn't be taking advice from her. And Esther got really mad. Now, eventually her account was deleted. I don't know if she deleted it herself or if it was taken off of TikTok. But this is a shocking story. I definitely would never have imagined that the woman who was giving me advice about my teeth was a convicted murderer. So you might have recognized the guy on the right side of that video as TikTok Mafia creator Clap Daddy. Now, Clap Daddy was a big creator on this platform, and he's been accused of doing some disturbing things. So Clap Daddy, whose real name is Colton, rose to fame before 2020, and that's really when all these allegations came out. And like you see with that first video that I included here, he was friends with some pretty big names here on the platform, and a lot of people knew Clap Daddy, but they didn't know what he was like in the shadows. So this all started in 2020 when a creator, a fellow cosplayer named Ava Lee, came forward and told her almost 1 million followers at the time that Clap Daddy had a clear history of fetishizing trans men and that he was known for saying sexual things to them. Then after this creator posted this, another creator named Lucas, who was 16 at the time, came forward and said that Clap Daddy had been talking to them, messaging them all the time, even though they knew that they were only 16. And they said that Clap Daddy even offered to fly them out to a hotel room to spend a night together. Lucas also said that Clap Daddy made a list of the high schoolers' kinks and would frequently bring up this list in conversation. And after this was shared, a number of other trans minors came forward and said that Colton had been messaging them. He was trying really hard to get one of these trans kids to come sleep with him. And another person said that specifically Colton had told them that he wanted to sleep with a trans person who wasn't out of the closet yet, even though he knew this person was underage, and that he had once again offered to get them a hotel room. But what did Clap Daddy do? Well, he posted a very damning rant to all of his social media, a 7-part rant, where he admits that yes, he talks to minors. He said that it was because he's in the cosplay community, And he claimed that he didn't flirt with minors, but then in the same sentence, he admitted that he does compliment them, which obviously is a form of flirting. So there wasn't really any real end to the situation. Clap Daddy just faded away, thankfully. But yeah, it's just shocking to see so many of these creators that are bigger creators never get charged with, talking to minors and grooming people and stuff like that, when the everyday person definitely would be charged with something.
I have a stalker, and this update is probably the scariest one yet. Something really freaking scary happened last night. I was sound asleep, and at 3:28, my TV just turns on. And it doesn't just turn on to, like, the title screen or anything. It goes to that random video, like, ferrets from the same people who made Charlie the Unicorn. And I thought it was, like, an alarm. So I was like, Alexa, turn the alarm off, and she didn't. And I was like, Alexa, turn the podcast off, and she didn't. And I realized that it was coming from downstairs. I go downstairs because it's really loud, and I take the remote and I turn it off, and I go upstairs and I don't think anything of it. Then I remembered about that randomly at work, and I was like, that's really weird. And so I thought to check my cameras, and my free trial expired, so none of my cameras were visually picking up anything, but they did detect the motion. And at exactly 3:28, well, first of all, I think it was 3:13 before this happens, like 15 minutes before, it detected a motion where the cars are, and the car windows you can, like, see to the living room. And then at 3:28, right as I got up and turned the TV off, there was more motion in the cars. So I'm thinking maybe it was my stalker just trying to see if I was home or if I was awake or something. I don't know for sure, but do any of you guys know if you can turn on an LG TV without a remote? Like, if you could do it on your iPhone, or if you could buy, like, the same remote and be able to turn it on like that? Because I'm not sure what it was, but yeah. And I'm going to provide receipts. Okay, so as you can see over here, where I circled, at 3:13 a.m., there was movement in my cars. Sorry, I blacked out my address over there, and then 3:28, inside front where I turned off the TV, there was more movement, and then once again at 3:28. So I think someone turned on my TV, was watching from my cars, and then left when they saw I was awake, but I'm not sure. I need you guys to help me and to help me figure it out. So yeah, if you have any information on how LG TV works, that would be great.
This is one of those cases that doesn't sit right with me. This is Dorothy Jane Scott. She was murdered in the 1980s, and for years, the killer tormented her family with phantom phone calls. And to this day, they are still out there somewhere. So let's dive into the story. So the story of Dorothy's disappearance is really strange. On the night of May 28th, 1980, Dorothy drove two of her friends to the hospital, as one of them had been bitten by a spider that night. So at the end of the hospital visit, while they were waiting to get a prescription filled, Dorothy Jane walked to go grab her car and bring it up so that the two friends could meet her outside. And once they were outside, the friends saw Dorothy's car coming towards them, but it quickly sped off and left them there. Now, they couldn't see who exactly was in the car, who was driving, because the headlights blinded them, but in a few hours, they reported her missing because they couldn't get in contact with Dorothy. And she would be missing for years. So in the months leading up to her murder, Dorothy had acquired a stalker. She had been receiving phone calls at work from a strange, unidentified male caller. And on these phone calls, this guy would tell her how much he loved her, and then he would state that he intended on killing her soon. One day, this phantom man even told Dorothy to go outside because he left a surprise on her car, and when she went outside to look, there was a single dead rose on her windshield, which is very creepy. On one of these particularly gruesome phone calls, the caller even stated that he planned on abducting Dorothy and chopping her up into little bits so that no one would ever find her. So these phone calls obviously terrified Dorothy, and in the week leading up to her disappearance, she started taking karate lessons. Okay, so let's flash back to the night that Dorothy disappeared. Remember, her friends were waiting for her outside of the hospital when they saw her car speed by them, but they couldn't see who was inside the vehicle. At around 4:30 a.m. that morning, 5 hours or so after they saw her car speeding away, the car was found abandoned in an alleyway 10 miles from the hospital, and it was on fire, which torched all evidence that could have been in the vehicle. So Dorothy would be missing for years, 4 years in fact. But it only took 1 week after her disappearance for the killer to start calling her own parents. So about every Wednesday afternoon for a period after Dorothy went missing, this caller would call her parents and say the strangest things. He would tell them things like, "I have her." He would also claim that he was the one who killed Dorothy. He was basically tormenting her parents and saying that he knows exactly where she is and what had happened, but he was never going to tell them. Now, 4 years later, this was going on for 4 years, in April of 1984, this caller once again called Dorothy's family, but instead of her mom picking up the phone that night, her dad did. And after her dad picked up the phone calls completely stopped. That is, until a few months later. Now, in August of 1984, a construction worker would come across a set of bones that belonged to a human and a dog. And those bones were eventually revealed to be those of Dorothy's. And immediately after her remains were found, the caller once again began to call her parents. This time, the police installed a recorder that bugged the family's phones. They were trying to get this guy's voice on recording and trace the phone calls, but the calls were never long enough for them to trace, and they still had no idea who this guy was. To this day, authorities still don't know how Dorothy died. And even though the phone calls eventually stopped, the killer's never been brought to justice. Now, the only suspect that's ever emerged in this case still doesn't have a name. It's the same guy that called, obviously, Dorothy's family, but it was a man who called a local newspaper just a few days after Dorothy went missing. And on this phone call, this guy said that he loved Dorothy, she had been cheating on him, and that he was the one who killed her. So that means that to this day, this killer is probably still out there somewhere, and they've never been brought to justice. This crime occurred over 40 years ago. There are no leads, and I don't think that this is a case that will ever be solved. If this killer dies, I'm sure that they're going to take this secret to the grave with them.
This woman killed a bunch of kids in Africa and is now acting like a victim. Just a couple days ago, HBO came out with a documentary about her.
What is feeling called by God? What is that like? Baby I just started to see malnutrition everywhere. So many children came seeking help. We decided to make a malnutrition rehab center.
Yeah, except she was 19 at the time she set up this center and pretended to be a doctor. And 105 children died. So when she was 18, she went there with her church group. Then the next year, she decided to come back and do things on her own, saying that this is a calling from God. It was a very, very profound feeling. It's like hard to describe in words though. Except the charity she set up was not backed by any governmental program. No US-based group was supporting this. The church was not involved. She literally just moved there and did this. She would wear a lab coat and a stethoscope around her neck all the time. She was treating children on a daily basis for 8 years, performing blood transfusions, inserting catheters, disregarding sanitary protocols, diagnosing patients with AIDS. And of course, when Fox News interviews her, they put heinous crimes in quotes as if it wasn't a heinous crime. She was saying it's a Christian nonprofit, but it wasn't backed by any church. At first, it was providing free meals to families in need. Then she just started to treat children for free for malnutrition, peppering the website with Bible verses, and this on top of wearing a stethoscope and a lab coat. These people had no idea that she was not legit. Prima Kwagala was working on the behalf of the mothers who lost their children due to this malpractice of this doctor, who was not a doctor whatsoever, was just a teenager. Yeah. Prima says that Renee targeted these mothers who had malnourished kids. They didn't have the language to explain the violations that were happening to them. They can't write, they can't read, they could never understand the healthcare system. Would administer drugs through IVs and write prescriptions. She was not medically trained at all. Someone who worked at the facility was saying on average, I would drive at least 7 to 10 dead bodies of children back to their villages each week. This mother is just one of many who brought their children to the center thinking that it was an actual Christian group who was going to feed her child and get them nice, fat, and healthy. She says that he was tended to out of her sight and then he died just days later. She never received a single explanation as to what happened to him. Then she would take pictures of these dying children and put them on the website to ask for more money. The problem is HBO is calling this a 3-part docuseries that examines the thorny complexities of foreign work aid done in the name of humanitarian and religious ideals. No, she impersonated a doctor and made these people believe she was one and then killed 100 children. There, I fixed it for you. A lot of other people are pissed about the way HBO is approaching this, saying she killed 100 babies in the process of this horrible thing and she settled in Ugandan court. And we're still asking about her intentions and if she's a murderer? You should cancel this documentary, HBO.
She would do things as if she was a medical personnel.
She was not qualified to do this. They were not licensed as a medical center.
DIY, that's what you call it?
She's now 30 years old and is being sued by Ugandan court. She's just back living in Virginia. The documentary is called Savior Complex if you want to watch it, and she definitely has white savior complex. I see that term thrown around quite a bit, and sometimes it's unwarranted and kind of unfair, but this is the textbook example of that.
Renee is being put up as an angel. People back in America think she's awesome. They're giving her money. Angels like Renee bring death.
This woman should be charged and in prison. She chronicled her experiences in a blog that people followed. The way that she writes her experiences in this blog is so disgusting. When I pulled back the covering, my eyes widened. For under the blanket lied a small, but very, very swollen, pale baby girl. Her breaths were frighteningly low. The baby's name is Patricia. She is 9 months old. God, if you've ever been to a Protestant church, you know that would get them going. That right there is their version of porn. I cannot believe she got away with it. And there are so many other stories about these mothers, obviously because of over 100 mothers lost their children. None of them ever knew what happened to their children either. Their kids were literally just dropped off at their house, dead. And they were like, see ya! A person who worked at the facility said that she would base her diagnoses off of gut feelings. How is she free? Honestly, I hope people get riled up by this, especially watch the documentary and realize what's actually going on so that she doesn't get away with this, because she should definitely not be free. Follow for more tea.